All right, so chapter 7, part 2 of 2, right? Got a little bit cut off on the previous video, so I'm pretty sure this is where we're at. So one of the big ecological roles of red algae is that they basically grow on things, okay? You have epiphytes, those are red algae that grow on plants, and then you've got epizoics, those are red algae that grow on animals. That's a chitin right there with red algae growing on it, and this right here is some red algae right here that's growing on this plant. Because of the stay-at-home order, I'm going to be recording from home now with this setup. So if there's any issues, just message me, let me know, and I will do my very best. Thanks to Miss Jaffe, I know about being able to write on here, and this is going to be our whiteboard. Okay? I am still taking care of the fishies. Don't worry about that. Human uses of red algae, phycocolloids, gel stiffening properties like agar. Agar, that's what you have when you have a petri dish. That gel at the bottom kind of looks like jello. That's what we're talking about. Irish moss, that's actually what is found in a lot of puddings. That gives that thickening agent to your pudding. Nori, what we feed Todd. What you find in sushi, some soups and some seasonings. Used a lot of Oriental cuisines, obviously. Animal feed and fertilizer is another use for red algae. Brown algae, some of your examples are rockweeds, kelps, sargassum, the one we talked about already. 99.7% of species are of 99.7 of brown algae species are marine. This is phylum Phaeophyta. They can be found typically along the coastline of high latitudes, so colder temperatures. Most are temperate, colder. Sargassum weeds are the exception to that. They are tropical. I've talked about that before. Sargassum C. The structure of the brown algae, they've got, again, that hold fast instead of roots to lock onto the actual rock or bottom. Sargassum, again, is an exception. They're free floating at the top. They'll have the stipe, equivalent to the stem, and then the blade, equivalent to the leaves. They have bladders. That's what you see right here. That bladder right there. It's full of air, so it actually makes all of the blades float nice and well, so that the entire plant can undergo photosynthesis. Their cell walls made of cellulose. Alginates, agar-like, they'll give the thallus strength, flexibility to withstand waves. Very, very, very strong types of algae. And you've got their life cycle right here. Okay? Brown algae, you've got the kelp forest, sargassum weeds, humans' use of brown algae, thickening agents again, like the agar. Iodine source, used as food, cattle feed, all big uses. For brown algae, flowering plants. Okay, flowering plants, these are definitely plants. So they're going to have your roots, your stems, your leaves, and they're going to have vascular tissue, i.e. phloem and xylem. Xylem carries water, WX, follow the alphabet, and phloem carries sugar, aka glucose. Okay? Two types of seed-bearing plants. You've got the conifers, and then of course you have flowering plants, plants that produce true flowers. All conifers are terrestrial, so you're not going to find any of these in the marine environment. Halophytes, these are plants that halo, again, halophile, remember? This is a halophyte, but halophyte, like we talked about, thermocline, halocline. Halo, it always deals with salt, okay? These are salt-tolerant flowering plants that live submerged underwater. They'll live beneath the water. The classification and distribution of seagrasses. You've got eelgrasses, surf grasses, paddlegrass, turtlegrass. Turtlegrass is because that's what sea turtles actually depend on. Very early on in their life cycle, once they hatched and take off on the beaches and go into the water, they're in their juvenile stages. They'll rely a lot on turtlegrass, paddlegrass, manatee grasses, what the manatees eat, and shoal grasses. Grasses are found nice in shoreline. So you'll see these little flowers. So it's not like the big flowers that we think of when you think of lilies or roses or sunflowers even. They're going to have a smaller, very small flower embedded inside the actual blades, but they are still going to be there. Okay? Arenchyme, that's your gas-filled tissue in seagrasses. They've got the bladders, lacunae, spaces between cells in the arenchyme, which will give gas transport because you're not going to have a lot of oxygen in the water. in some of these areas in the soil. So photosynthesis is their only source. So they're actually going to produce their own oxygen that they're going to need. They're going to fragment off. They are very much primary producers, depositing and stabilizing sediments because their root system is going to actually anchor the soil, the sand, in that spot. So by doing that, they're going to reduce turbidity. When I went to Texas A&M and Galveston in Texas, you'd go to the beaches and the water was brown. And for the longest time, we thought it was just because the water was so nasty. And then one day I took a plastic bottle, filled it up with water, and that water was crystal clear. The reason the water was constantly brown had nothing to do with the water quality itself. It had to do with turbidity from the sediments. The soil, the sand is constantly getting mixed into the water column because there's a constant erosion factor going on. And that's what was causing it to constantly be mixed in, so giving that water that dark, polluted look when it had nothing to do with it. Habitat, extremely important habitat. Obviously, like we said, manatees, sea turtles, you name them. You'll find a lot of seahorses that'll hide in some of the seagrasses too. Human use of seagrasses, wall insulation, like we're dealing with in my house. Soundproofing, food, medicine. Salt marsh plants, these guys are less adapted to marine life because they're salt marsh, right? Marsh is a mix of the fresh and salt water. Ooh, that brings me up to the ecosystems we're going to be talking about. You guys are going to have a little bit of an assignment. Must be exposed to air by the ebbing tide. Ebbing is the tide that's going to be coming out. Classification, distribution of salt marsh plants. Salt marshes are well developed along the low slopes of river deltas and shores of lagoons and bays in temperate regions. Temperate, remember, that's cooler, right? Above tropical. These guys have the culm, the vertical stem, the tillers, any additional stems that branch off of the culm. Aeronchyme allows the diffusion of oxygen again, and flowers are wind pollinated. Because they're exposed to the air, because they're not constantly submerged, these guys will actually get pollinated by the wind. The seeds will drop into the sediment, and on we go. Adaptation of salt marsh plants, they are facultative, not obligatory, facultative. That means that they can tolerate salt and freshwater both. They can do it either way. Halophytes, again, salt, halo salt. Thick cuticle, because you better believe it's going to have to make sure it doesn't dry out. Well-developed vascular tissues, salt glands. So it's going to get rid of excess salt. We're actually talking about another type of plant that does this. Just like our sea turtles who got rid of excess salt, and our marine iguanas, our plants are also going to get rid of excess salts. Succulents, so they are thick, just kind of the same type of setup as a cacti or a succulent period. So plants that you find in arid environments. So arid plants have a lot of similarities with salt and plants that are in salt environments. Ecological role, they contribute to detrital food chains. So becoming part of the detritus, they will stabilize the sediments again. The root system holds the sediment in place, bringing down turbidity. Habitat for other marine organisms. They're very important phosphorus cycling. They'll remove excess nutrients from runoff. And these guys are eaten by crabs and terrestrial animals. I've often been told when you go over the bridge to Fernandina, that beach that's right there, that salt marsh area, that there are a lot of fiddler crabs right there. That's why. They're hiding in there to eat those plants. Mangroves. Ugh, I love my mangroves. Classification, distribution of mangroves. There are 54 different species of trees, shrub, palms, and ferns in 16 families. The two main families are the red mangroves and the black mangroves. So if you notice this right here, that part is actually the root system. So, and this is the stems and the leaves. A lot of times, their roots will actually be exposed out of water and then go into the water column, be exposed in the water column, and then embed themselves into the sediment. So a lot of the root system, like you see right here, is actually quite exposed right there. All that is exposed roots. Where are they located? From tropical shores where there's limited wave action. They can handle a little bit of waves, but not much. The Keys, lots and lots and lots of mangroves in the Keys. Oh my gosh, beautiful mangroves. Low slope, high rates of sedimentation. They don't want to have a lot of sediments landing on them all at once because otherwise they'll suffocate their roots, cause them to not be able to get enough nutrients or water, fresh water. And soils that are waterlogged, anoxic, that means without dissolved oxygen, and high in salts. They're found in low latitudes, so closer to the equator, more tropical. Saline lagoons and tropical and subtropical estuaries. Mangle, those are mangrove swamps. They'll have very simple leaves, a very, very complex root system, like we discussed. Plant parts will help conserve water, supply oxygen to the roots, and stabilize the tree in very shallow and soft sediment. And here's what's really cool. You can actually feel and see the excess salt released by the mangroves on their leaves. If you look at their leaves, you'll see this white residue, and that's the salt, the excess salt that the plant's getting rid of on it. So it's so cool. Roots are aerial, they're above ground, and some are, contain arenchyme, that gas-containing tissue, because a lot of them are in low oxygen areas. Lenticels, they're scar-like openings in the stilt root surface, connecting the arenchyme to the atmosphere so that the arenchyme can directly absorb the oxygen from the atmosphere. So instead of just allowing the leaves, the stomata in the leaves, to suck in the gas exchange, oxygen basically, you've got these guys in the root system. When the roots are exposed to air, they'll take in oxygen in that manner as well. They have stilt roots. These are arrow roots that will actually help hold up the mangrove. We already did that. Anchor roots, they're short branch from the main root that'll hold the tree in the sediment. And then nematophores. All right, if you've been in any kind of swampy area and you've been around cypress trees, you will notice these little extensions that come out. They kind of look like roots, but these shoots up. It'll be about this high, and makes walking around swamps very difficult. Trip like crazy. Those are called nematophores, and these are aerial roots that will grow out the sediment to allow the root system to suck in extra oxygen. And we call them cypress knees, but they're knees. Nematophores is a scientific term for them, but they're really, really neat. Leaves are simple, oval in shape, leathery, very thick, succulent-like, obviously because, again, dealing with high salt area, salt content area. They have stomata, salt glands, concentrating salt and shedding leaves. I actually had a mangrove in my very first tank in the classroom. Tried it a couple of times, wasn't able to keep it alive, but it was neat because you could see the salt coming off of it. It was really, really cool. They'll have very simple flowers that are pollinated by wind or bees. Their seeds will fall in that little pod right there, and it'll fall into the water, and the water will carry it. They are very much endangered. You cannot play with the seeds. You cannot take the seeds. You're not going to, no touching mangroves. They're very protected and very, very important for the keys. Viviparity, they're propagule, so they basically have the baby seed. Boom, off it goes. Ecological role, stabilize sediments. Epiphytes, so they're going to grow in a plant. So epiphytes live on the aerial roots, so you've got other plants that are going to grow on them. And the canopy is a home for insects and birds. The mangles, so the swamp, the mangrove swamp, is a nursery and refuge. Mangrove leaves, fruit, and propagules are consumed by animals and contribute to detrital food chains. All right, you guys, and we finished chapter 6.